What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Mr. Clark After Dark. Today I have on the one and only Tany Yao. Tany Yao is currently the MLA of Fort McMurray with Buffalo and is also the Parliamentary Secretary for Rural Health. On this episode, Tany and I discuss his move into politics and his hilarious harassment of Brian Jean and creating the Highway 63 highway back in 2015. His experience being an emergency responder and how it shaped his ideas of rural health in his current role as Parliamentary Secretary. The issues Fort McMurray has faced over the past 10 years, what the pitch is of moving to Fort McMurray, and kind of what the main vision is for it going forward with the new Conservative government here in Alberta. How the Conservatives got wiped back in 2015 and adjusted to being in opposition. What Danielle Smith has that Jason Kenney does not. The future of the NDP without Rachel Notley. Alberta's response to loosening legislation on psilocybin, safe consumption sites, dealing with the politician label, and of course, much more. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. All right, so Mr. Yao, Honorable Yao, thank you for coming on, man.
Well, honorable is only for ministers, so you don't have to refer to me as honorable.
All right, so formerly paramedic.
Paramedic and firefighter.
Paramedic and firefighter. So how does a paramedic and firefighter manage to find themselves in politics?
A good friend of mine by the name of Brian Jean convinced me to run with him.
Never heard of him. Yeah. Fort McMurray for 25 years. You hear the name every now and then.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, he's doing well. He's doing well. He's our Minister of Energy. So,
yeah. So how did he kind of get you into politics and why?
You know what? We're both in Edmonton. I was taking care of my father who was in the hospital. He's taking care of his son. Okay. And we randomly ran into each other there and just started giving each other moral support by just hanging out. And it was during that time that I saw his battle with the health authorities with his son. And the treatment or the test that he needed could only come from the United States.
Okay.
And, in typical Canadian fashion, we're hesitant to spend money on things out of country. Mm-hmm. And in the end, he was able to get the test, but it was too little too late. And his son passed away. But that's certainly what was driving him towards politics is he's being recruited at a time by the Wild Rose to be their leader.
So what year was this?
2014, late 2014.
Okay.
And him and I had known each other for years before that. And I'd always harass him really on why aren't we getting our road twinned? Why aren't we getting this infrastructure? Why aren't we getting that? And he just saw my passion. And when he was getting recruited there, he asked me to be his running mate. And a week later, they called the election. So
okay.
So and that was 2015 when that finally happened.
So what made you be like, yeah, I will go into politics? Like what was was it just kind of his advice? Did you always kind of have an inkling toward it? Or
I guess I had an inkling if I wondered if a guy could influence change, and he just hit me up at the right time. So, and like I said, I didn't have much time to think about it after that. It was commit to it, and so I did, and well, I've been elected ever since.
Yeah, it's worked out for you.
It's
so
worked
far.
out. It's worked out. So
and so once you kind of agree to go into politics, was there ever kind of a back and forth with yourself of like, do I run Conservative, NDP? Like, why conservatism, and like, why would you consider yourself a conservative, and how did you define what a conservative is?
To me, a conservative is someone who's first and foremost, I'm a fiscal conservative. I really do believe in just a government running balanced budgets and spending money appropriately, and really I believe in lower taxes and less governance and rules, and I really believe in the freedom of the individual. So that's where I consider conservatives to be. Whereas you mentioned the NDP, I believe they're more about government control. They want stronger, bigger government. A government that leads us in all ways, whether it be our lives at home or out in public, and it's something I, just wholeheartedly disagree with. I do believe in individual freedom.
Okay. Yeah. And so right now you're kind of moving into you're a Parliamentary Secretary, right? And you are also in charge of Northern Development. Like, what's the actual full description there?
I'm the Parliamentary Secretary for Small Business and Northern Development.
Okay.
So with that role, the Premier appoints us. There's some objectives she wants to see within these roles, but they do give us a bit of flexibility in what we perceive as the main challenges based on the outreach that we do. And because I'm an experienced guy in the legislature, I knew that there's some things that needed, including some guidance in regards to Northern Development. Also, I wanted to make sure that no one ever forgot the lessons that we learned here in Fort McMurray was basically a community that was growing because of industry, but they forgot about the town itself. And if you remember back then, Lucas, Fort McMurray actually applied for land from the province and was rejected.
Land for what?
Land to grow. Okay. So if you notice around Fort McMurray, we're surrounded by crown land, forests. Whereas you go to any other community out there, especially down south, most communities are surrounded by agricultural land. So, if there's a need for a community to grow, a developer can sense that need and buy that piece of land from a farmer and develop it into a new subdivision. And Fort McMurray, we didn't have that luxury. And that's why we saw escalating prices in houses, crazy rents.
So is this the provinces, or is this federal land? Obviously, Crown land.
Well, Crown land, the province manages that on behalf of the federal government. But I mean, but that's what they refer to as Crown land, right?
Because I've always wondered, obviously, growing up here, the house prices were always the big thing. I would say from 05 to 15, you're pretty much any sort of average home in Edmonton or Calgary that was $500,000 or $600,000 would likely be $800,000 here. That was kind of like our little housing boom that we had. I always found it strange as to why there wasn't just more expansion. Like, why can't we just build more homes? Like, because we're literally, like you said, surrounded by a forest. Why was that such an issue? So I guess is there still an attempt to kind of develop Fort McMurray? Because, again, kind of being the, I guess, subjective and objective observer, it does seem like Fort McMurray has crashed to a large extent. Would you agree with that or no?
Yeah, it does. Certainly we saw with these Suncor layoffs here recently. Out of the 1,500 that they announced over a year ago, they mentioned that only a small percentage of them would actually be from Fort McMurray. It turned out it was the majority. And that
was living in the city?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it affected a lot of their workers directly that lived here in town, which is really frustrating.
Yep.
It's just a disappointing thing, but I think most communities desire some level of growth. Certainly the nation does. And they measure their success by the amount of growth they have. Fort McMurray, we're now well suited to accept that growth. We have those, a lot of land prepared and ready to go, whether it's on the north side of town or on the south side of town by the airport.
Yeah.
We have the space available for new subdivisions to be built. And considering that we're a major contributor to not only the provincial but federal economies, I hope we get that support. But it's disappointing to see a lot of the commuting that's going on.
Yeah, so how would you attract more people to want to live in Fort McMurray?
What
would be your pitch, I guess?
I guess my objective is to ensure that our post-secondary institution in particular and our hospital have more than adequate services to provide to our population. I was really reminded of that by a couple I met from Newfoundland who reminded me that one of the reasons why they moved out here back in the late 70s was because of the opportunities that they would have for their children compared to what they had back home. And in other words, we had a school that was a post-secondary institution that was providing some really good programming. And we also had a hospital that actually provides some really good services. And those are some of the reasons why people want to move. Obviously, we want to make sure we have good schools, like what you work in here, and good facilities, whether it's sports, good amenities, things like that. We've grown a bit here since I've grown up here, and it's nice to see we have a variety of a selection of grocery stores and other retail outlets to ensure that people can access the goods and services that they need. We do have, I think, an excellent school system, Catholic and public, as well as some smaller schools like École Boréale, which provides our French and obviously so does École McTavish, and we even have a school that offers some Chinese language skills as an example. We have a Muslim school as well. Yeah. We have a variety of schools to really address a lot of the unique needs of the people that we're attracting up here. You want to make a community livable.
Yeah,
is what's most important.
And I've always found, I lived in Calgary for a few years for university myself, and I always found that the community aspect of Fort McMurray is very underrated. I do find it to be a very welcoming place, because I find, but people always kind of buy into the fact that it's temporary. How do you kind of get rid of that label?
It's an organic thing. I don't know if you can really force that, but you're right. People that come here, they tend to come alone or with just their immediate family around them and that sort of thing. And they're more open to meeting people because they are alone. And that's where you really get that sense of community, that those friendships being built is because people are forcing themselves to go out there and meet people. And I think that's an excellent dynamic to our community. But you're right. It's unfortunate that people have that dynamic that they're coming up here with a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
That said, those 5-year plans tend to get blown out the window.
Honestly, the joke is that the 5-year plan is really the 15 or forever plan. No one ever actually pulls through, and people who usually end up moving away typically always come back. I don't know what that is about it specifically, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I have working at the fire hall there. I had a group of friends there that were all from Ontario, and a bunch of guys from Ontario came out here to work out here. And I tell you what, I think every one of them met their partner out here and have stayed far longer than I think even they anticipated. This is home for them. Yep. They're raising they've had children now, and they're all raising those kids. But it certainly demonstrates the strength of our community and the benefits.
Well, and I think this argument holds less water than it did 10 years ago, because we were just talking about the highway being twinned. Back when I was younger, basically the main argument was, I just don't like how it's so far from Edmonton or so far from anything else, which is true. It still is 4 hours to drive. I was just down for a convention. But with that highway being twinned, you kind of shave you shave a half an hour off your trip, right? And you also shave a very stressful portion off of it as well. So I do think that the long-term, culpability of McMurray is actually, it seems like a better place to live than it was 10 years ago, but now people are arriving less and less. So I know right now one of the main incentives people that usually look at for attracting people to Fort McMurray would be the living allowance. And now I've heard rumblings that there's potential this could be taken away. Or is there any thought kind of considered of adding or subtracting from the living allowance at all?
No. So back in 2019, when we had a new government there was a desire to make things more fiscally responsible and look at ways that they can cut. And unfortunately, our Minister of Children's Services saw that Fort McMurray was getting that subsidy from the province, and it was the one department, Children's Services, that cut that for daycare workers, which is really unfortunate. I did fight that.
So you can do that departmentally?
Well, this is a revelation to a lot of people. Is actually spending decisions like this are made department by department. It's up to each ministry to make that decision. So I spoke to Minister Lagrange, who was the head of education at the time.
Yeah.
She had a son that worked up here with the RCMP, and she understood the dynamic with Fort McMurray, and she also saw, it was a valuable subsidy for our teachers up here. So God bless her, she maintained that.
Yeah.
Whereas again, when you look at Children's Services, they're looking at ways to cut, and the minister at the time chose that direction. So that's unfortunate. I did fight it. And I did go to the other ministries to make sure they weren't doing anything hasty with Fort McMurray, and thank goodness they didn't.
Yeah, I thought that a living allowance was kind of a blanket public services decision. I didn't think that was just a department one.
Yeah, no, it's a department by department thing at the provincial level. I don't know how the feds work exactly, but I don't think federally they get that up here. And
I think ours, we get our living allowance in two parts. like as a teacher, I know like when it comes through on our stub, there's like 400 from one, 600 from the other. I assume that was provincial and federal. I don't actually know for sure. I don't know what the division of that would be for, but
No, my understanding is the provincial subsidies are all provincial.
okay.
And that said, there's also municipal for all the municipal employees. When I was working here, I used to get that.
And so this is me being like a little bit nosy, but how involved are you with the development for the Métis Center or like the cultural center?
I'm not involved with that at all. That's the Fort McMurray Métis.
So but is that the because I know like construction has been halted on that. Am I accurate in saying that?
I believe so. I don't think it was they had the most well thought out plan in regards to building that structure. Most organizations would have some sort of a business plan and architectural drawings and everything else to ensure, a building schedule.
No, I'm just wondering, like, is there any sort of plan for the province to kind of get in to kind of provide some extra funds?
Well, I fought for them to get, I think, $5 million from the province, and I think they're supposed to get about $10 million from the federal government, but I don't know where the state of those two grants are.
Okay.
And I couldn't really give you much more information on that project.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and honestly, it's just every time you drive by Mac Island, it's hard not to think about like, oh, when is that going to be done? Especially as a social teacher here, you're trying to look at some sort of localized knowledge for the students to learn. Obviously, that would be a great resource. But kind of walking back to your first election victory, again, kind of looking at the experience of a politician. Once you get elected, what is kind of like the first week like? Like you get elected and then what happens?
Oh, I vaguely remember that. I remember just kind of looking around thinking, okay, now what? We won the election.
That's like, I wouldn't know, like if you were to get elected tomorrow.
And then I think the next day or something like that, I can't remember if I received an email or a phone call, but it was the legislature saying, providing information as to what next steps are. So, and I think they said in about a week or so, they expect you to come to the Edmonton to the legislature for your orientation and everything else.
So what do they go through with you at orientation to be a MLA?
Oh, everything, everything from signing up for your computer access to giving you all that sort of stuff. Here's your email account, that sort of thing. They explain to you your job as a legislator. And they sit you down in the house itself, in the chamber, and just explain to you the basic ideas of the proceedings. That was in 2015 was an unprecedented election where there's so much turnover. So
true.
so most of the people were new. Like all the Wild Roses were new, all the NDP guys were new, and I think there was only like nine guys left from the Progressive Conservatives at the time.
Yeah, they got wiped pretty bad after like a 43-year run.
It was well deserved though, between you and I. So so it was just orientation on everything. Other than that, it was trial by fire. And I fortunately had Brian Jean as a.
That's fair. Yeah, he's definitely been around. I don't know how many years he's
a mentor.
Been in, but
well, he'd done federal, which again is actually substantially different from provincial. Like at the federal level,
no, he was in federal government.
Yeah, he was a member of parliament for a decade. So, but at the federal level, they got a lot more resources than we do provincially, because Alberta's been traditionally run by conservative governments. The government's always been lean. Like I know everyone thinks that we spend a lot, but compared to other provinces, like say Quebec or as an example, we're actually a very lean government.
So you actually spent your first term in opposition.
You bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was kind of how did the Conservatives kind of respond to being in opposition for the first time?
You know what? We just did our job. I mean, it was the only job we knew for all of us with the Wild Rose, and that was to oppose the government, which we gladly do because the NDP were...
You oppose yourselves when you're in it.
Yeah, well, the NDP were putting in rules and governance, whether it was a carbon tax or other things that we just disagreed with entirely. Yeah. So, I mean, they jacked spending up. I think they jacked it up by about $90 billion over their term.
Because I don't know, I thought it was no more than $15 billion in a total deficit for a year. I could be wrong, but I know like in the mid like 2010 we were balanced. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Yes,
yeah,
Ralph Klein balanced it, and then Stelmach and then Redford after him took on debt, and then Prentice wasn't there for very long. I think he was attempting to balance things out, but when the NDP went in there, they just spent like drunken sailors, quite honestly. We're feeling the effects. This is the year that we actually have to renegotiate a lot of these loans that they took out.
Okay.
So remember, we're now negotiating these loans at more than double the interest rates that they had.
Who do we borrow money from?
Geez, that's a good question. I think the Bank of Canada has something to do with that.
Okay.
I think there's the ability to get loans from other institutions like international banks.
Yeah.
But I would actually have to.
Well, yeah, because I know obviously like you go into like borrowing money and deficit spending, et cetera, et cetera. But I remember even seeing this video of like the world is $125 trillion in debt to itself, like in terms of the amount of debt that's kind of circulating at all times. And from an outside perspective, it can almost seem like money isn't even real. Like obviously I know it is, but you're looking at these massive deficit spending campaigns almost everywhere, and you're like, where does this actually come from? But I don't know, it's kind of something I've always wondered, but yeah, just kind of a slight interest. But when you first came into opposition in 2015, obviously I think we had 4 premiers in 4 years, from 2011 to 15.
Yeah, like I said, like there's Stelmach and Redford, and then Prentice.
Yeah, and then
and then someone after Redford left.
Someone in like 2014, and I always forget their name. But
yeah, I'm trying to think in my head here, and I can't. But there's someone that was there for a few months.
So yeah, and so that was a time when the Conservative Party was fragmented. Obviously, the NDP coming into power. I remember Harper getting involved in 2019 and trying to unite the Conservative Party, which it did. How difficult was that process of uniting the Conservative Party?
Very difficult because, quite honestly, there is a.
So what are the core divisions between like a Wild Rose and a former PC?
Well, I can see a difference between rural and urban as an example. And I mean, urban, yeah, we're talking about Calgary versus the rest of Alberta. Okay. I mean, Calgary tends to want all the money spent in Calgary.
Okay. But even like the Conservatives in Calgary, is that like...
yeah, well, that's
obviously the politicians who are representing their riding want the money spent there. But.
Yeah, but if you look under Premier Jason Kenney, I mean, majority of his cabinet was from Calgary. And so they would get favored for a lot of the spending.
But is it fair to say that was kind of what he had, though? 'Cause I know Edmonton was like dominantly NDP.
Yes, but we did have a lot of rural guys that were available. And there's no one dumb in our caucus. Let's be clear on that. They're like anyone who runs there, they have good education, they have good life experience, work experience, that sort of thing. So... and anyone who gets chosen in any position, I think they really rise to the occasion. It's a lot of work, but I think the Conservative parties tend to attract really good people, and it's the politics that play a role.
Yeah, 'cause I guess I'm just wondering, like, I know there's a rural and urban divide in the Conservative Party, but I guess like fiscally, are they different? Like, what would be an example of like what they would disagree on, and like I guess what are the compromises they've made?
I think a lot of the spending, for example, goes on infrastructure and stuff like that. So I mean, like a lot of the guys rurally, I think would like to see a lot of their infrastructure, like roads and stuff, more developed. You know, up here in Fort McMurray, look at us.
It's like a negligence. Is that kind of the like
you want to draw attention to your community? Yeah. So look at Fort McMurray. We contribute billions of dollars to the provincial coffers, and look how long it took for them to consider twinning our road. Look how long it took for them to actually provide us with freeing up some of that crown land so that we could develop more subdivisions. I mean, our road still isn't twinned all the way. There's 190 kilometers that have yet to be twinned.
I thought it was like twin 63, which they did, but then you hit Highway 28 for however many hours.
Exactly,
and
there's still sections of 63 down there as well that aren't twinned. I know they say that, well, it splits up into several routes and roads and it makes it easier, but if someone has to drive that every week, I've had some scary situations, including last week when there was that snowstorm in Edmonton. Yeah. There's a moment I couldn't see. The snow was coming right up. Yeah. I could see a guardrail. I was using that as a guide, but I didn't want to stop because there's vehicles behind me. Yeah. and it was just very disorientating, just for a few minutes there. But I tell you, it would be nice if it was twin.
Yeah, it'd be nice if it was twin. I definitely agree. But I guess I'm kind of circling down to now that the party is united, but like you technically still didn't even go an entire full term with the same leader in your party, with Jason Kenney. Danielle Smith kind of comes in before the election. Do you think that we're finally now in a united Conservative Party term where we see one premier last the entire 4 years? And now, obviously, I think you're going to say yes, but like, what does Danielle Smith have that Jason Kenney did not?
You know what? I really like Premier Smith. I like the fact that she listens to everybody. She's willing to admit if she's made an error. I find her to be a lot more humble, far more approachable. You know, she makes time for all of us, including myself. I've enjoyed my conversations with her. I really, quite honestly, enjoy the people that she surrounds herself with. It's just been a more collaborative approach to governance. And I really see a harmonious group right now, quite honestly.
A collaborative, not a Calgarian approach?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, admittedly, we did lose a bunch of seats in Calgary, but however that turned out, I see us now as just a well-distributed government and with a lot of good people working in there.
What are your projections for an NDP future without Rachel Notley?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think she was extremely popular. I think she was you know, we have to give her credit. Yeah. She was a charismatic leader. She did some things with the NDP, like got them to recognize that they need our product. They need oil here in Alberta. She went against the grain federally because the NDP is the one political party that provincially and federally, they are the same organization.
Okay, so because I know that does that mean that every provincial NDP government is also the same organization?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, they have the same board, the same council. Like when they have their meetings, it's they have their federal counterparts there. They are considered one and the same. When you buy a provincial NDP membership, you're automatically enrolled in the federal. It's the only political party that does that. And actually, if you look at some of the folks that are running in this leadership race here in Alberta with the NDP, some of their statements have been that they want to separate from the federal NDP.
And I've even seen softer tones on like a carbon tax and even like kind of the major, I guess, center left to left wing policies that you're seeing at the federal level are kind of being rejected by like our localized left wing kind of alternative. Yeah, which is strange. But I guess my prediction is that popularity will decrease. Now, only because I think Rachel Notley is almost synonymous with the NDP here in the province, which I think now, because as far as I know, it's just Sarah Hoffman and Raki Pancholi who are running for leadership in like a meaningful way. And I don't mean to disregard anyone who I
Kathleen
may know.
Ganley from Calgary is running as well.
Okay.
There's rumors about Nenshi, the former mayor from Calgary. He's been talking about it. He has his feelers out.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this one girl from the NDP has announced, and my goodness, I forgot her name, but I know David Shepherd was looking at running, and actually he came up here. He's Edmonton Center.
Okay.
And he actually came out to Fort McMurray, an event I was at, and he told me he was running.
Okay.
But sounds like he tweeted something recently and he pulled out.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll see. There's still time for them for people to step in, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, because I know that's just kind of like the thought experiment where I always kind of pull with my class here. We kind of look at the history of the NDP a little bit and how I think they had like 12 seats, I think, before Notley won in 2015. Then they had the majority after.
No, I think they had like 3 or 4.
Oh, was it only 3 or 4? There was, I know.
So
I thought
Brian Mason, Notley, Nate Mason, David Egan, and
so the fact that you can name them
and Billis and Darren Billis. Okay. So I think it was just the 4 of them.
Yeah, because it seemed like Alberta was kind of always a 2-party state. but it was the Wild Rose and the PCs. It was never really like a...
Well, the NDP were in the opposition ranks,
yeah.
and there was, if you remember, there was a Liberal member as well.
Yes.
We've always had the one Liberal, but it was Dr. Oh, my goodness. I can't remember why. I'm blanking on his name, but once he left, there was no other Liberals that got in.
Yeah, I don't see any being elected anytime soon, in Alberta anyway. But now it's kind of the recent uptick. Like, I think it appears to me, again, as outside observer, that Smith has more of a hold on the reins of leadership in the party than Kenny did at the beginning. Because I know at first Kenny was even kind of considered as a federal guy who's kind of just like stepping in. That was kind of the reputation. Or I think as Danielle Smith has kind of always been in the Alberta scene. I was actually kind of reviewing a bit today how that she was one that crossed the floor and was kind of out for a little bit. But with the federal election coming up soon, how do you kind of foresee Alberta changing if a Conservative government is elected at the federal level?
We can only cross our fingers and pray that we have a change in government federally. Well, for starters, I think you'd see the attitude on our local industry here change, as an example. With a reasonable government, Alberta would be exporting a lot more of our natural resources out, and we could displace a lot of the carbon-intensive energies that are burning currently. We can make more of an impact on climate change and global pollution by providing natural gas to China and weaning them off coal. I mean, British Columbia is currently the largest exporter of coal right now in North America. And we got to stop that. I mean, that coal is the dirtiest burning product out there. And again, we can replace it with natural gas. We can replace it with oil even.
So, and I know like kind of one of the first times that Alberta kind of came into the crosshairs of the federal government was with the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And now correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Alberta was going from 800,000 barrels to like 2.5 million was the goal with the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Is that correct?
I can't remember exact numbers, but it would double.
Like,
it would double the capacity of the pipelines.
And is that project completed? Like, what is the...
I don't think it's done yet. I know it's going through British Columbia.
Projected to be completed? Is
Hopefully
that like
soon.
Okay. And so are there any other, like hypothetically, the Conservative government is elected. Now we have a Conservative government in Alberta and at the federal level. Are there any other projects that are kind of being considered to increase oil output?
Well, in the same way that back in the day, a nation-building exercise was our rail lines, right, from one end of the country to the other, we could potentially see some pipelines being built under a federal government that was supportive of it with the cooperation of all the provinces. Mm-hmm. But again, Eastern Canada relies on the Middle East and Venezuela for oil. We're funding, by buying oil from these nations, I mean, we're funding regimes that kill people for being gay. Mm-hmm. We're funding regimes that discriminate against women and don't give them equal rights and power. I mean, Canada could be totally independent of fossil fuels from other nations, and it would be a fantastic thing if we could provide that energy for our nation, be independent, and not provide funds for these regimes that really discriminate against a lot of people whose beliefs are not in sync with yours or mine.
Mm-hmm. And so I have a question. Is there anything the Trudeau government has done that you agree with? Like, has there ever been a time, because I know even when you were in opposition, just hypothetically, the job of the opposition is to oppose. So was there ever any time when you actually, like that you can think of it, that were good ideas either by the Alberta NDP or the federal Liberal government that come to mind? No.
I'm drawing a blank here. I'll be honest with you.
No, it's all right.
No, unless you can prompt me on something. I honestly can't think of anything.
No, because I guess I kind of always teach my class as if even if you are in opposition and you agreed with an idea, it's still technically your job to oppose that idea, to kind of show Albertans or Canadians the alternative.
You're right, 100%. Yeah, you're right. That is the role of Her Majesty's official opposition, is to oppose, because there is a percentage of people that will disagree with governments, and it's important to have those arguments out there. So,
as you kind of get into politics longer, so did you have any experience with politics at all before 2015?
No.
And so obviously you know, like, oh, Canada's a parliamentary democracy, et cetera. Was there anything that once you kind of get through the motions a bit that kind of surprised you at all? Like, was there ever a time in like the process of creating legislation that you were just like thought was strange or kind of interesting about the system?
You know what? I got to see the effects that they do take opinions of individuals to heart when they're trying to craft these rules and regulations. And that's why it's important to know what's going on and to voice your opinions on things like that. An example would be liquor stores. Right now, they're looking at expanding the sale of liquor to 7-Elevens and Circle K's.
Yeah.
So
why only those two?
And to grocery stores,
Yes,
and other areas. A lot of people I've spoken to actually disagree with that. They like the way liquor is sold right now in a very specific store. Those stores aren't allowed to sell any other goods other than liquor, really. And it's been like that ever since the government freed things up from the Alberta Liquor Control Board, ALCB, and government-owned stores. And as a result, we see a lot more liquor stores. They're owned by private individuals. They create jobs. They fill up real estate space, again, helping the economy. And I like that. Whereas to change the rules now and to allow a lot of these other stores to sell liquor would hurt the existing stores and would make liquor obviously more accessible. But I'm not sure if I agree with that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, is marijuana privatized in Alberta? Like, I know there's more intense government regulation on the product that's sold. But like, for example, in New Brunswick, it's like NB cannabis and it's like NB liquor. Does Alberta have privatized marijuana sales?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Like all the stores that so we skipped a step there. Instead of having provincially run stores, we followed our liquor store experiment and allowed just private individuals or stores to sell marijuana. That's a federally regulated industry.
Okay.
So they fall under a lot of federal rules. But actually, I guess there's one that the Trudeau government did, now that you mention it. I mean, because they legalized it, we can now tax that, and that creates revenue for the government for something that was probably being sold quite proliferally through the underground.
And I know it's been kind of more common recently in a lot of U.S. states, or a few U.S. states have done it. Is there any consideration of Alberta potentially legalizing? I'm trying to think of the actual word for it. I'm thinking of magic mushrooms here, but I'm not like shrooms or psilocybin.
Psilocybin. You're right.
Yeah.
British Columbia, I think, is experimenting with that. Honestly,
I know it's legal in a lot of cases for like research and stuff, but I'm just wondering, like, is this kind of a process that we're going to kind of keep seeing play out a bit more?
I honestly couldn't tell you anything about that drug. I haven't heard anything. The things we've been dealing with are more of the heavy narcotics and things like that, like fentanyl is an example. The federal government's approving fentanyl to be used or given out to kids right now. There's a lot of provinces that are pushing towards what they call safe supply, which is legalized drugs, basically. British Columbia is the example, right? They've decriminalized every drug.
In certain areas, right? I think it's like in some sort of in the safe supply areas. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. As far as I'm concerned, British Columbia is just allowing the proliferation of drug abuse by decriminalizing it and providing government-funded drugs out there for free, which is really disappointing. Whereas Alberta
I've heard the rhetoric on that. Like, and so I'm trying to like play devil's advocate here, because I know the opening of the safe consumption sites is meant to hopefully get those individuals who are using a safe like needle or safe access to it in case something were to happen to them.
Yeah.
But I think the goal at first was to actually have like kind of easier access to those people to eventually get into rehabilitation. Do you think that's like, do you disagree with that approach?
No, as someone who's a former healthcare professional, I understand the premise where they started.
Yeah.
If you recall back in the day, started giving out things like allowing access to clean needles and making those products free,
has that
and
expanded
sharps
more than I'm
containers.
aware of?
And over time, that has grown to, you're right, these locations where they allow people to do drugs, where they can be supervised so that when they overdose, there's a nurse or someone there who can give the antidote, which is Narcan or naloxone. It's the intent is noble, but the actual effects are just the most harmful thing. I mean, ultimately, they're supporting the use of these illicit substances, which really kill people. So right now, the two big experiments are British Columbia and Alberta. Alberta, we've gone to so in British Columbia, they do what they call the harms reduction approach, where again they're removing all the barriers and allowing people to have these drugs whereas in Alberta we've gone the treatment mode, and we've opened up recovery centers. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars to open up new beds for recovery. We've removed all the fees so that if you know someone who needs this service, there's no fees. They can just enter at any time. You're seeing the two big experiments here in Alberta and British Columbia, and we're in totally different opposite directions on that. And well, time will tell, but I'm really supportive of our measures, which is helping people get off these drugs and not facilitating that drug abuse the way the BC is.
Okay. And so we were talking off air before about how you're currently involved in a Northern Development Report. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I'm going to be working on a report on Northern Development, and I'm going to be touring all the communities north of Highway 16, which goes from Jasper to Lloydminster, and just addressing the infrastructure needs and other things that communities need to support their growth. There hasn't been a report like this done over a decade, and the hope is that when I'm done this report, it'll be something that will guide municipal, provincial, and federal elected officials and other folks for years to come as to what the priorities are. So being an elected official, I've gone through 3 mayors here, and with each mayor, the direction changes on what their priorities are.
Okay, so how have the priorities changed over time?
Oh, I guess just what they feel needs to be the emphasis on certain infrastructure and all that. So I think by doing a robust consultation, we can identify what are the priorities based on some factual information like revenue generation and things like that to determine what are the priorities and ensures that governments have a more solid direction as to how they invest the money with each budget that they provide.
And so how long have you been carrying this out so far? Or has it even started yet?
I've done some preliminary stuff here in Fort McMurray, but we're still planning the outreach tour. It's a bit of a logistical challenge for me, especially with us being in the legislature right now. Otherwise, I would have probably started now. But
and how long does this kind of a report take?
I hope to do all the information gathering by July, and then the bureaucrats will take the information that we gather and spend a couple of months formulating a report from that. And there'll be obviously some back and forth with myself and other folks that I'm going to bring onto my little committee to study this Northern Development. And my hope is by the fall that we can table a report on Northern Development. And again, there hasn't been one done in many years, and I want mine to be more robust than others.
So I guess my question, like, I wouldn't have that report from 10 years ago, but I guess, like, have you looked at that other report very much to kind of see, like, what the process was to kind of change or adapt from that?
No, I glanced at some of these other reports that have been done on Northern Development, and like I said, I don't know if I'm overly satisfied with some of these reports, but they did provide some good things, like they were directing the need for broadband, so internet capacity in a lot of communities. So as a result of that, the government did spend lots of money, and they still do to this day. But it was based on a lot of the findings of this Broadman report that they did to emphasize that the communities that needed the infrastructure. I mean, we're still going through it, but that's how long government takes.
So I guess, so I guess what would you mean, like what would be your definition of like a more robust?
Well, I want to make sure that we learn some of the mistakes from previous years. So I want to use Fort McMurray as an example of errors made in provincial judgment. Provincially, they never released lands to Fort McMurray, which increased the low supply, which caused the low supply of housing, which increased the prices for us. And a lot of people today still have mortgages from on house values from a decade ago when houses were much more expensive. They can't even sell for fear of just lose.
Or pretty much starting over 15, 20 years in.
Yeah, I mean those are mistakes that hurt people for their lifetime. I mean, my goodness, we don't ever want to see any of the community commit those atrocities, right? I mean, because we had no space to grow, the municipality allowed these work camps to proliferate and these airstrips to be built, all these little aerodromes everywhere. Now we're seeing the result of that a decade plus later, where people won't move to Fort McMurray because they can fly from the Maritimes out here to work week in, week out. It's terrible. Like for the workers.
I know even Curl pretty much did 10 and 10. Like I have a lot of uncles that work with Curl and that don't live in Fort McMurray. And that was kind of like everyone said they complained about 14s being too long, but like Curl kind of just hit the nail on the head with the 10 and 10. But.
Yeah, no, I think it's if you actually were to really look at the people who are working those shift schedules, it's a hard work schedule. Not only are they away from their families, but when they do the 10 nights in a row as an example, like that's hard on their bodies on this.
I know teaching has its challenges, but I'm thankful every time I walk out into -40 that I'm not working out in it.
Exactly. And there's so many components to it, but it's a hard life, and it's not healthy for the individuals.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So, but for a community, it's hurt us greatly. I mean, we're talking about growth earlier. Well, there is no growth right now. It's very frustrating. There's the last numbers I got from the Oil Sands Community Alliance were that OSCA, before they turned into Pathways, was that there's over 30,000 workers commuting to Fort McMurray to work. A third of those, 10,000 of those, are from out of province. So, wow. I mean, that's over 10,000 workers that are paying their taxes out of province, but reaping the benefits of our oil industry. And then they go back to their provinces and attack our industry here. It's so hypocritical when we're funding so much of the tax collection from other provinces, and they continue to denigrate Alberta. It's the most hypocritical, mind-blowing thing, and it's frustrating. Again, these are lessons that we have to learn, and I want to make sure that those are in my report.
Interesting. So you guys just passed the budget last week. What was the kind of biggest need for Fort McMurray, do you think, and the northern area? Like, what is kind of the most urgent upfront need that you think and that you kind of advocated for?
Well, it's a lot of piecemeal little things. So they're going to be giving more funding for healthcare. So I hope that we can recruit more doctors, increase medical student positions. So hopefully we're going to see some of that here in Fort McMurray. Can't say much, but I'm working on some of those aspects right now to support our community. I mean, the whole province is having that population growth. Us less so, unfortunately, due to the commuting thing. But I mean, we are getting money for École Boreale. Got money finally for a new school. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, we have had funding on the books for upgrades to our schools as well. Westwood has been identified as needing a renovation, with the old swimming pool and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay.
But there is a dilemma. For the amount of money to renovate the school, the local school board is saying they could build a new school. So that's where government infrastructure, provincial infrastructure, is going through stuff right now to just determine that. And I don't know how they go about making the final decision. Yeah. Fort Chipewyan, as an example, is also supposed to be getting a new school. They've been I was successful in getting them money a few years ago, last term, but they still haven't started on that. Unfortunately, local politics has taken a hold, and they can't decide on the site. But I mean, we do have potential for some new schools. I mean, look where we are. Right now, right?
Clearly it works out once the process goes through.
Yeah,
but
so the funding to expand this school was key there a few budgets ago.
Yeah, because I know even like our school here has gone, I think, from 1,200 to almost 1,600 in the last couple of years. And I know, like, I often see I know you're not directly involved in education, and I probably won't go down that path very much, but I know that Alberta funds their students the least per student in Canada. Do you have any like thoughts on that, or like measures that you think should be taken in the education realm for spending?
I'd have to dig deeper in on that.
Yeah. I know it's like 11,000 or something per student, and I think like actually New Brunswick is the next highest one or the next lowest one. But
We also have lower taxation in Alberta compared to other provinces as well. Like there's no PST. The cost of living is cheaper here compared to, say, Ontario and British Columbia. So there are some of those factors. But I believe, if I understand correctly, it's a complex formula that they do when they're funding things. But just in Fort McMurray alone, I just thought we had some fairly decent schools. I couldn't talk too much about school class sizes or anything like that. I'm not well informed enough.
No, that's totally fine. How has your perspective on politicians changed since you became one yourself?
I respect politicians a lot more. I don't consider myself to be a politician. I like to use the term elected official. And my job is to advocate for my community, my region. And I do that with great passion. I like to think I've been successful in a lot of ways. We got our EMS dispatch back. I thought that was a pretty good one, as a recent example. But at the same time, I'm flabbergasted at some of the decisions governments make, like at the federal level. Like, it's really demonstrated to me that there are people that can be real ideologically driven, make those ideologically driven decisions and they don't talk to the people that it affects, and it's concerning to me. But so I mean, it's a mixed bag, I guess.
No, I'm not trying to like put you into a bind, but I guess like the common rhetoric or the narrative is like, oh, like that person's just a politician, like they're just trying to say whatever it is to get votes, but obviously, whenever you are doing something yourself, you're going to obviously you don't want to be seen as that or that to be the narrative around you. So I guess like, and I think for the most part, if you get to know a lot of politicians kind of one-on-one, it'll change your perspective, as it is with anything. When you actually meet someone, you have a different perception of who they are versus your judgment of them outside of it.
Most people are just normal people. They get elected. They are an elected official for 1 or 2 terms, and then they leave. But everyone goes in there based on what they know. And again, with our federal government, I mean, we have a lot of people who are ideologically driven who don't seem to have that much life experience other than being activists, as an example. It's our Minister of Environment right now federally. That's all he's done. He's an activist.
Yeah,
I mean, our prime minister.
The Viking in Montreal thing hasn't been the best storyline for his political future, but yeah. All right, so I got one more question for you, Tany. Now, whether or not you're in government for the next 4 years, 8 years, 16 years, what do you hope your legacy is after you leave politics?
I hope my legacy is that I leave things better here in Fort McMurray, that we get a lot more of the things that I've been pushing for. I mean, it's a long drive. There's still some things that I knew since I got elected about some of the services that we need that I've been still struggling to get us. I mean, it's a tougher battle than I anticipated to get some services, and it's really disappointing. I've been exposed to a lot of things that have been frustrating, where you see like things like social profits, for example, nonprofits, where they seem to lose sight of their causes and become a bureaucratic challenge onto themselves and don't necessarily provide the services they should be.
Okay.
So there's been some revelations like that for me. But in the end, my hope is to leave things better here in Fort McMurray, things that are provincially influenced, whether it be not only more schools, but better programming at our post-secondary, again, more health services at our hospital, less travel back and forth for our constituents so they don't have to go to see specialists, that maybe they can either see them online or those specialists are coming to Fort McMurray. Those are some of the things I hope to achieve.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for coming on today, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hello again, everyone. Just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to listen to our conversation here today. If there are any issues with professional conduct or you would like to share your own story, experience, or have something you would like to contribute to the show, please reach out at mrclark@gmail.com or send a direct message on Instagram to @mrclark.afterdark. Hope you all enjoyed, potentially found something of use, and of course, please do not forget to subscribe. See you next time, unless you're scared.